What's happening, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to discuss episode 4 of The Young Pope, to do my reviews slash recap. Reviewing episodes, I don't know, almost didn't even make a lot of sense apart from saying this episode was better or worse than the last. I feel like you can review a premiere and you can review a season as a whole, but once you're in, it's more about just discussing what's happening. So my review is, I like it a lot, and I look forward to every episode. But it's hard to say any more than that without going into massive spoilers. So, spoiler warning, blah, blah, blah. Let's talk about what happened. What I loved about this episode is that we tackled two very, very important subjects I've been kind of waiting to see when and if and how the show would, and that would be the supernatural, aka like kind of like the magical or the divine, and also the Pope's temptation toward the opposite sex. And both are potentially very provocative, but I love how this episode opens with a simple sheep herder who's got the stigmata, the bleeding palms, as if he's been nailed to the cross, and he's claiming to see the Virgin Mary, the Madonna, and all these people have gathered out in, I guess, his pasture in order to be healed. These are, clearly patients from a hospital and things like that. So it's a really mysterious, ominous, kind of like magical opening, which they don't even refer to again until much later in the episode. It basically immediately grabbed my attention when I realized what kind of territory we were going into. But kind of the main thrust of this episode is Cardinal Vogliello's efforts to essentially rally Esther to his cause against her will. Esther is the really, really pretty and devout girl played by Ludivine Sagnier, I believe is how you say her name. And she's all in on Pope Pius XIII. However, she recently had an affair with one of his assistants, and so now Vogliello is kind of using that against her in order to try to pressure her into seducing Lenny. He tells her that he's had all these affairs and that essentially he wants her to sleep with him so that he can use it as leverage against him to prevent him from destroying the Catholic Church. But more on that to come, because there's a lot of other juicy stuff that happens over the course of this episode. What I really liked was there's this meeting where the Prime Minister of Greenland and her assistant arrived for a meeting with the Pope. Totally superficial gathering, pressing of the flesh, all that kind of stuff. But before the meeting begins, Lenny and his marketing expert are watching as all these closeted gay priests are flocking around the openly gay assistant of the Prime Minister, and only Cardinal Vogliello is speaking with the Prime Minister, and he's just kind of watching and observing, and his marketing expert is very wisely refusing to say or even acknowledge that she sees anything. It's very interesting kind of interaction. But where this comes into play is when Vogliello and Lenny are talking about what to do in the Kurtwell case, which is a pedophilia or molestation case over in the United States involving a young boy and a priest. And essentially, Lenny says that what he wants to do is throw all the homosexuals out of the Catholic Church and not allow any more homosexuals to be priests. And Vogliello very calmly responds that pedophilia and homosexuality are two very, very different things. And Lenny simply responds that in the eyes of the Church, both are equally shunned. And now Vogliello realizes essentially that Lenny is going to completely dismantle and destroy the Catholic Church as they know it, because if you were to ask all the closeted homosexuals to leave, the entire structure and hierarchy would crumble. So this is, in Vogliello's eyes, kind of an existential threat to the Catholic Church, making his mission with Esther all the more important. There's some great humor in this episode, admittedly kind of mean-spirited humor, but humor nonetheless. There's a young sister from Sri Lanka, Sister Suri, and her sister recently died. Her literal sister died. And she's terrified that she goes back to Sri Lanka, that it'll bring back all these memories that'll basically destroy her faith in the church. So Lenny has the corpse flown to the Vatican so that Suri can cry over or weep for the loss of her sister. And Lenny basically walks in and says, "Stop crying. The faithful don't cry. Like, no more crying at funerals." It's just ruthless. And then we have another great bit where Vogliello is talking with Esther, and she's talking about how she believes that Lenny respects her and how she feels horrible about being forced into trying to seduce him. And the actor Silvio Orlando, he's just incredible in the scene, but he's trying not to smirk and not to laugh, and he's basically can barely contain himself because he just clearly has zero respect for Esther's attempt at a principled stand or the idea that Lenny could have respect for anybody. And I feel like just in a lot of ways, Sylvia, I can't even pronounce his name, Silvio Orlando is very quietly kind of stealing the show, or at least stealing the thunder, because every time he's on screen, you just can't take your eyes off him. It's an extraordinary performance. There's an interesting scene also where we see a sign of a potential conflict to come, or something that Lenny might put to use, but the sheep herder from the opening of the show, he goes on TV and he basically says that he wants to be acknowledged by the Catholic Church, that every time he tries to prove that it's a legitimate stigmata and that he's seeing the Virgin Mary and that he's actually healing people, because people line up to be healed by him, although he says he can only see 100 people at a time. All he wants is for the Catholic Church to acknowledge that he is part of the Catholic Church, no more, no less. But all of his letters to them go unanswered. They just get returned unopened. So he's basically threatening on TV to form his own church if the Catholic Church does not acknowledge him. And we see Lenny very intensely assessing the situation, watching the program, kind of debating. You can just see the wheels turning in his head. I love watching shows where smart, cunning people are always working on a long game, and you can tell he's not ignoring this phenomenon and recognizes that it can be potentially dangerous or useful. Probably the most interesting scene this episode is when Lenny's out in the gardens jogging. He has all these interesting experiences in the gardens where he keeps bumping into that kangaroo that he freed. And they're almost these surreal moments, so you can't quite tell if he's dreaming or not. But as he's jogging along in his all-white jogging outfit, he goes by the home where Esther and her husband live. And Esther desperately wants to have a child. She even comes to the Pope at one point and asks him to teach her how to pray. And he's kind of explaining all the different ways that you can do so with humility. And it turns into, while they're trying to pray, there's all this incredible sexual tension. You can tell she's essentially trying to talk about how she wants to give her beauty to him, and he kind of won't let her speak because he can tell that something's going on that, would be frowned upon. At any rate, as he's jogging along, he sees that she and her husband are having a pretty intense sexual encounter up against the glass or the window of their home. And it leads into this bizarre intercutting or cross-cutting between Lenny on his knees praying for her coupling to yield a child, but the way he's praying with his incredible intensity, it's going back and forth with the actual sex, and it makes it seem like his prayers are part of the rhythm of the sex, and it's really, really juicy stuff. You don't quite know how to interpret it. At any rate, whether it's blasphemous or erotic or however people want to take it, it's definitely an intense scene where you can tell, almost for his own sake, he's hoping for her to get pregnant, because you can tell the temptation is starting to get to him. But there's so many great cinematic flourishes like that throughout the episode. One thing that does not get enough attention is the beautiful electronic score in this show. I mean, even when it's just Lenny hanging out and just thinking about things, there's always this killer background music. And there's a great bit at the end where he's standing there and he just turns to the camera and looks for a couple seconds, like he's looking right at us, almost as if he's doing all this for our benefit as the audience. It makes it a very personal show, and it makes it that much more gripping, because when the main character, who's as fascinating as he is essentially performing for our enjoyment, it just gets us that much more invested. And then it cuts to this incredible, I guess, Paolo Sorrentino-esque moment that only Sorrentino would put in a movie, or a show in this case. It shows this beautiful dancer doing her thing, and it starts giving us all these facts about Greenland, like the best in the world at fishing for halibut, and how they find their urges to dance to be uncontrollable. It almost seems like a non sequitur, except for the fact that obviously there was that meeting earlier with the Prime Minister of Greenland, who presented an album of an Italian who lives in Greenland, and all this kind of cool rock music she's doing. But it just makes this show stand apart from a traditional show. So many shows are just plot-driven, boom, 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 and then you're moving on to the next episode. I like how this show really stops to pause, it stops to breathe, and it pauses to give us these wild cinematic flourishes. It makes me feel like I'm just watching a giant 10-hour movie as opposed to an episodic television series. So yeah, once again, another fantastic episode of The Young Pope. I'm all in. Love it to death. And hope you enjoyed my commentary / recap / review / spoilers, all that good stuff. Please give me a subscribe if you are so inclined, and give me a shout on Twitter at Colbrax if you want to talk about flicks or whatever. And check out my podcast, Wrong Reel, on iTunes if you want to hear some long-form interviews and movie talk and all that good stuff. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to y'all soon.